I want to thank the committee for inviting me to present information from the country's National Dietary Intake Survey, What We Eat in America, and Hanes. I want to recognize my co-authors on the paper who are responsible for me being able to stand up here. Joe Goldman, our survey statistician, and Randy Lacombe, who put all of my slides together. So without, I just get to come and talk about it. For this analysis, my task this morning is to look at what the National Dietary Survey data shows us in relation to nutrient intakes and comparing that to the dietary reference intake. So we report data out for 64 nutrients. So I had to narrow down what I was going to focus on. And so I looked at the 2010 dietary guidelines and the nutrients that they recommended or recognized of concern for the population and used those primarily as my focus points, as well as I threw in one or two more others to take a look at. The first part of what I'm going to show you will show usual nutrient intakes adjusting for the within-person variation and comparing intakes to mainly the estimated average requirement, the DRI measurement. The last few slides look at and take advantage of new information that NHANES collects on a specific 24-hour recall of the dietary supplements, which has been funded by the Office of Dietary Supplements, or NHANES. I don't know if a lot of people are as much aware of this as they should be. I hope everyone in this audience is. But it really gives us an additional valuable piece of information. You get a 24-hour recall on food and beverages, as well as the exact intakes, based on what people tell you, of what the dietary supplements are that people have taken that same 24-hour period. So you really get a very good picture of total nutrient intake. And so I know we're focusing on fortification today, but I think that piece of making sure we look at total nutrient intake, and especially with Kathy talking about we want to be sure we're looking at the strength of the evidence, this gives us that total picture. So for this analysis, we used the 2005-2008 data from What We Eat in America. The 2008 is the most current of what's available. Monday, we're doing the final check on the 2009-2010 data, and if everything goes well, that will be out, I hope, by the 4th of July. Yay, we're always glad for that. So the sample is 17,000 plus individuals 1 year of age and older, 2 24-hour recalls, and we use the National Cancer Institute's method for determining usual nutrient intake. So of course we collect the dietary data using the USDA's automated multiple pass method, a 5-step method that goes into extensive detail, asking people about all the foods and beverages, including water, that they consumed over the past 24 hours. We validated the method, and so we need to keep in mind, based on that validation for energy, on the validation study for adults, that underreporting for energy is about 11%. So as we look at total nutrient intake and consider fortification, we have to keep that in the back of our mind. We also have to keep in the back of our minds the strength of the composition data for all the foods that are reported. Luckily, USDA also puts out the National Nutrient Database for standard reference, which is the basis for our nutrient values. That database is updated and released each year, so we get to take advantage of that for the nutrient profiles for the foods that people are reporting. there's an extensive program to keep that database as up-to-date as possible, but I think you all who know about food can appreciate the challenge of doing that. So we have to keep all of this in background as I present the data and the numbers. Okay, these are the nutrients of concern from the 2010 dietary guidelines: potassium, dietary fiber, calcium, and vitamin D. And I'm going to present some specific information on 3 of those. Dietary fiber I chose to leave out because it's a time frame and hopefully I won't go over. Nutrients of concern for certain population groups are iron for women of childbearing age and pregnant women, folate as well, and Essie's just talked about that, and vitamin B12 primarily for older adults because of their diminished capacity for metabolizing vitamin B12. And I'm not going to talk about that as well. We're working on being able to discern the different forms of vitamin B12 and compare it to the DRI. But we just don't have that done quite yet. So it's in process back home. Okay, so the first slide, if you remember anything, let's remember this one. This looks at the percent of Americans with usual intake, so it's adjusted for the within-person variation, below their EAR. And the green on certain nutrients here are those of concern from the 2010 dietary guidelines. And we can see that most of the population is below their EAR for vitamin D and vitamin E. For magnesium, calcium, vitamin A, and vitamin C, at least a third to a half on average of the population is below their EAR for these nutrients. For vitamin C, I pulled out the smokers because the EAR is higher for smokers. So about a fourth of adults are smoking based on the NHANES data. The EAR is about 20 to 25 points higher for smokers, and you can see for those smokers, most of them are below their EAR. For zinc, B6, and folate, about 10% of the population is below their EAR, and I'll talk about some of those in a bit more detail. For the following nutrients that I've just topped up, less than 6% on average are below their EAR. You can see those listed. For iron, this is for the population overall, but of course for pregnant women, the percentage is much more higher, and I'll go into that as well. Now let's look specifically. This is on average across all Americans. Let's look specifically at some of these nutrients across age, gender, race. The first one is for vitamin D. Let me just orient you to this slide a bit. This is looking at a distribution of usual daily intakes from just food and beverages. The blue bar is usual intakes at the 50th percentile. The green bar is usual intakes at the 95th percentile. The red line is what the EAR is for the age group. And on the top, in fairly small print, is the upper level value from the DRIs, just to give you a frame of reference. So here you can see most of the population is below their EAR for vitamin D, not surprising. We were just finishing up on vitamin D and looking at the distributions across age, gender groups. And we can see that almost all of the population is below their EAR, and at least based on food and beverages, we're certainly not at a risk of going over the UL for vitamin D. For calcium, the difficulty here, of course, is for young girls and women. In this age, you can see where here is the red bar is their EAR. And of course, even at the 50th percentile, we're below what their EAR is. Next is folate. And again, the difficulty here, of course, is for pregnant females as well as women of childbearing age based on their EAR and where we see the intakes at. While vitamin C wasn't identified as a problem nutrient, I did want to show it because overall about a third of the population have intakes below their EAR. And certainly it's not a problem for children because they're probably drinking fruit juice and eating more fruit. But as you can see, when we get into the teen years and the adult years, this is where there is a concern. I never think of vitamin C as being a nutrient to be a bit worried about. But so I usually highlight this one because I think it kind of gets perhaps a bit bypassed, if you will. This looks at the distribution for iron intakes, and again, it is primarily here with pregnant females. Here is their EAR, and females not quite as bad for those in childbearing age.
You did.
So I've got it twice. Or
backwards.
Or backwards. Sorry. Oh, maybe I'm going.
There you go.
Sorry, I was going wrong. You done?
There you go.
Iron.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let me just point out that there's not an EAR for potassium. It's an AI. So as we look at these, we're not looking at the percent of the population that's below their AI. An AI is, as you I think all realize, where the evidence isn't strong enough to have an estimated average requirement recommendation. So we're looking for, we want the population to be at the AI or over. If they're underneath, we can't say that their diet is inadequate, but it certainly does give us an indication that we're not meeting the AI. And you can see for all the age groups, none of them, other than males 19 to 50, and they're just slightly below their AI, are even approaching the AI for potassium. Of course, this plays into the concern of the over-intake of sodium. Fruits and vegetables, milk products, etc. Now let me shift to looking just at total daily nutrient intakes, along with the total daily intake from dietary supplements. Of course, we do 24-hour recall for foods and beverages. And as I've been giving presentations and talking, I'm using foods and beverages because beverages are playing such an important role in the diet. And we keep talking just about, at least we have at our places, about foods. Beverages make up about a quarter to a third of the caloric intake of individuals. And a number of beverages are being fortified with a number of different things. And segments of the population, young boys, teenage boys, are drinking a lot of beverages, and a lot of some of these beverages that are fortified. So I think that's important for our keeping in the back of our mind for our discussion today. So the next few slides I'm going to show look at total nutrient intakes just for the 2 years, 07-08, for both food and beverages and dietary supplements. They're not adjusted for usual intake, and it's looking across all individuals. So it's on average all individuals. It's not just only supplement users. It's the snapshot of the population with total intake from food and beverages. These are the nutrients and components that supplement intake is reported for, and we have on the FSRG website intake from both nutrients and supplements for these components. So what I'm showing you is a summary from some of those. This is the percent of Americans using dietary supplements on a day. So this is that same day as the 24-hour recall was taken. It's slightly less than you'll see reported data when people say, on average, do you use dietary supplements? People will say, yes, I do. But like medications, Americans, not all Americans, are as diligent about using those supplements or taking their medications as they say they typically do. So particularly for this older group of Americans, and we'll see that on the intakes, the impact that the supplement had for these older Americans. In general, in looking at the percent who report that they typically take a supplement versus the percent that reported they took at least one or more supplements over the past 24 hours, it's about a decrease of about a quarter overall. So it's important as you're looking at these kind of reports to keep in mind the frame of reference for use of the dietary supplement. Okay, with all those caveats then. This looks then at total daily intakes from food and beverages in the blue and dietary supplements in this dark red on the top. And you can see there is a higher proportion of older Americans reporting dietary supplements and a higher proportion here of getting intakes from dietary supplements. I put up in the far right corner what the EAR is, the ranges, not for vitamin D, it's just one, but the range for the upper level. So we can just as a frame of reference see, are we approaching or not? This data hasn't been adjusted for usual intake, which you're supposed to do when you're comparing population level data to the DRI. But I think it's important just to see the frame of reference. And you can see particularly for these older Americans, the supplements are making a difference. For calcium, not as much as for vitamin D. Now this is calcium from supplements and antacids. It is not any nutrients from prescribed medication. So also keep that in mind. For vitamin C, again, you can see the difference, particularly for these older Americans. But again, we're not approaching the URL. I'm sorry, the UL. For iron, but this next slide, I pulled just the supplement users and looked at what their intake was from food and dietary supplements just for iron. And you can see we're approaching close to the upper level when you consider just dietary supplement users. Let me just go back. The prior slide is across the whole population. It's considering supplement intake, but based on the whole population. But when you drill in and just only pick out those supplement users, you can see that this is the nutrient we're perhaps approaching. And I just wanted to show you the table where I took this information from. This sits on our website for these 33 nutrients. We have total nutrient intake across all individuals, which most of these ending slides were. This is just looking only at the supplement users for the iron, so you can get at this information off of our website. We'll have the same types of data tables for the 910, but it will be a while yet because we don't have access to the dietary supplement data until it's released, because NCHS controls that data. But because of the influence of supplements and having this kind of information now, thanks to the Office of Dietary Supplements, we began putting this kind of information out so that people can see total intake. This looks at potassium, of course, not much implication here in terms of potassium from supplements. So in summary, most Americans had inadequate intakes for vitamins D and E, inadequate dietary intakes. Prevalence of inadequacy was also high for magnesium, calcium, vitamins A and C. And for some nutrients, dietary intakes were inadequate, but only for certain groups. For B6, it was female. For phosphorus, it was teenage girls. I didn't show that. For zinc, which I didn't show as well, it was for older adults and teenage girls, and for iron, primarily pregnant females, obviously. Most Americans had adequate intakes for this long list of nutrients. I think it's important as well to consider all the nutrients for intake. Looks very good. And last but certainly not least, I just want for us to remember today that both nutrient intakes from food and beverages and dietary supplements are important and need to be considered. Thank you.